I'm not sure how I got back to this.
There you go, you're good.
All right, can you see the next slide up?
No, we're just seeing the first one.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the emergency action plans. Once we get buy-in from the schools or the community center, we want to go in and discuss what an emergency action plan looks like. So I think we're all aware of this is Hank Gathers, who passed away during the NCAA basketball tournament. And this, I really think, brought to attention that sudden cardiac arrest can happen in athletes. Two things Hank needed that day was CPR and an AED. When he was placed on the stretcher, the person at the front of the stretcher knew CPR, the person at the back of the stretcher knew CPR, and there's an AED in the team doctor's hand as he was walking next to the stretcher. It wasn't put on until he got out into the ambulance. So the next question is, so are we prepared if this happens again? And really, it's not if it happens again, but it's when it happens again. And this is a young lady that had a cardiac arrest. And so this is from the National Association of School Nurses. And it, AEDs, they're not just another thing on the wall, but the mere presence of an AED or bystanders with CPR training is not adequate should a cardiac arrest occur. And I really like the quote, "A crisis is the time to follow a plan, not the time to make a plan from scratch." And we always say you can't Google what to do in a cardiac arrest while it's happening. So these are the essential components for an emergency action plan for sudden cardiac arrest. One, personnel training. First responders need to know about CPR and using an AED. It needs to be site or venue specific, and that includes, the name of the building, transportation routes for EMS. Communication plan, is it walkie-talkies out on the playground? Is it a push button, panic button in the classrooms? How do they communicate to the first responders? Immediate AED access. So how many AEDs do you have? Can you get it there within 3 minutes of collapse? And then practice, like Brian talked about, we need to do a practice drill. And then advanced cardiac care facility. Where are you going to take this patient? Is if it's an adult, is the closest hospital doing caths? Can they do interventions, or is it just a diagnostic cath lab? Or are you going to take them someplace where they can do open heart surgery? And then after the practice drill, you want to make sure that you do a debriefing and reporting. And we have tools that we can use through Project Adam that provide all these things for the successful emergency action plan. This is just a quick example. So you'd have the building location information. When you call from a landline, it will automatically show up the address of the building. But if you're calling from a cell phone, they may not know where you're at. So we want the school name and address, the team members, who are they, and then the location of the AEDs. And this is something I talk about. Make sure that if you're having the community using the school building, the school gym for an adult basketball league or some other type of facility use like that, make sure that those people know where the AEDs are as well. And then can they get to them? Is part of the building locked off, from the gym? Are they coming to the gym from outside? Can they get through the gym doors into the building to get to the AEDs? So we really want to be venue specific. So do you have the equipment? How many AEDs? Are they accessible? And then do you have that built into a budget so you can replace pads and batteries? And then what's the names of the buildings? So I always give the example, the middle school is an old high school, or the old middle school is now an elementary school, and the older teachers know it as the old middle school, but the newer teachers know it as Mary Smith Elementary or whatever that name is. So make sure everybody knows the names of the buildings and the areas of the buildings, so to make sure to get to the victim as soon as possible. And then do you need do you need a key to get in? Is it code access? How do you get into the building? If you're out at practice and the coach has a cardiac arrest, are the keys in his pocket? Does he have a hang tag, with a name badge that can give him access? And then think about EMS access points. On any given day, is there construction going on between you and the nearest EMS or fire station? So these are some of the things that we talk about and looking for. So this is a school campus in Georgia, outside of Atlanta. And you can see right here is the actual high school, what they would call the high school. So if you call 911, the address of this building would show up. You can, over here is the athletic complex. This is the stadium football field. This is one of the practice fields, another practice field around the track. And then you have baseball, softball, and then various other buildings. So we want to make sure and do a site assessment. You know, how can we get an AED? How many AEDs do they have? And when we first went to this school, they had 3 AEDs to cover this campus. So that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. And then what type of equipment do you have? And we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute. But you know, what type of AED do you have? What kind of pad system do you have? Is it the Z.O.L.E. Plus with the real-time feedback for CPR? If that's the case, and then when you're doing trainings, you need to have an example of this. So during an emergency, when they open this packet and this pad system falls out, they don't look at it like and say, I've never seen that before. If you're using the single pads as practice, is the alarm turned off on the AED cabinet, or is it disabled? So we want to make sure some of those things. What type of equipment are you going to have? And then as far as AEDs, what are the laws in your state? This is something that I was really surprised about when I started looking into AEDs and laws. For Georgia, it says that all schools within interscholastic sports
primary, second,
has to have 1 AED. So you can see we need more than 1 to cover some of our school campuses. And then when we talk about AEDs, you know, this, as the medical people, this is what an AED looks like, and we all know what it's going to do. But when you talk to teachers, they think it's going to do this. So that's one of the things, take the fear out of it. When we open the AED, it looks like this, but the teachers think it's going to look like this. And we've all seen the studies about how important it is to get the first shock off, time to defibrillation, and we know that survival drops by 10% with every minute that passes in cardiac arrest. And I think this is real important when you're looking at a campus. And just to show that campus again, if you have 1 AED in this building that you're compliant with Georgia law, how are you going to get over here in under 3 minutes? So you actually had to take the road, go out, come around, and come into this back parking lot over here to get to the track and field and one of the practice football fields. So those are some of the things that we want to look at when we're talking about venues and equipment with AEDs. This campus now has 23 AEDs in various buildings. When we first went there, they had 3. And then next, we want to talk about communication. So how do we get this teacher to recognize a cardiac arrest and get EMS there as soon as possible? We know that the average response time for EMS is about 10 minutes. So there's a lot of communicating between the time this is recognized as a cardiac arrest and getting EMS there. So what we need is first responders that Brian talked about, instead of bystanders, we need first responders. So some of the first responders that I always tell people to look at are gym teachers, anybody with previous military experience, have had some type of training, or they've been around situations where they've seen blood, or gym teachers. If some kid got hit in the nose with a dodgeball and started bleeding, or has fallen and breaking an arm, and then coaches as well. And then the other person I always talk about is the janitor or custodial staff. They have keys to every door, and they know how to get from one position in the building to another the fastest way. So I say consider them as being part of your first responder team as well. And then for the first responders, we want to make sure they're trained. You know, AED special circumstances. Can you incorporate this with fire safety training or HR training? And then make sure, what does a cardiac or medical emergency look like? 2 things that I always remind people of, and what Ryan touched on is gasping respirations and then seizure-like activity. So if it looks like they're having a seizure, it could be a cardiac arrest. And we always tell people it's a cardiac arrest until proven otherwise. And then we can always start with hands-only CPR. When the first responders get there or EMS gets there, we can advance care as necessary. And really with hands-only CPR, there's no excuses. We know that it's effective. You don't have to worry about giving mouth to mouth, which especially now during the COVID times, people would be more reluctant to provide that. And so we want to make sure that we're starting compressions and then getting the AED as soon as possible. And we want to do practice drills. We want to make sure, and really this is the fun part of being part of Project Adam, is when you go to a school and do a practice drill. You want to assign tasks, and I always tell people, assign 2 people to each task. The assistant principal may be off campus, a teacher may be sick, or they may not hear the announcement. And if you go by an AED and it's still there, grab it and take it with you. You know, I'd rather have 5 or 6 AEDs at the scene and then no AEDs with everybody thinking somebody else has got it. Emphasize early CPR. Always tell the story. You know, it's better to do CPR on somebody who doesn't need it than not to do it on somebody who does. And then debrief. Make sure there's always a debrief afterwards. And then this is the study that Ryan alluded to from Dr. Dresner. And a couple of things that really jump out at me is survival to hospital discharge. If an AED was supplied by the school, 80% survival versus 50% if it was brought by EMS. And then survival with and without an emergency action plan. It almost doubles the chance of survival if you have an emergency action plan. To me, that's really phenomenal when you think about, you know, people, when you talk to a school and they'll say, well, we have one of those AED things. And it's okay, that's great. Now, do you have a plan to use it? It's like, well, yeah, we have people that are trained in CPR. Well, then let's do a practice drill and see how you do. And one of the examples of a practice drill that we had last year, it took 8 minutes for the first shock to be delivered.
Richard, we are running low on time, so
okay.
If you can summarize a little bit, that would be helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so let's see a case study. So this happened on October 13th, 2015. A 17-year-old female went into cardiac arrest. And this is captured on video from her father. So that's when EMS got there. So that when we did the debriefing, we were able to go through the timeline as to when things happened. At 16 seconds, somebody said, call 911, get the AED. It wasn't, they didn't think a 17-year-old girl fainted. At 32 seconds, the AED's at her side. They had one right outside the gym door, right outside in the lobby. CPR was started at 56 seconds by a trained athletic trainer, certified athletic trainer. Pads were placed at 1:43. And this is when they opened up the pads and they had the Zoll system. And the teacher who opened it up said, I'd never been trained on those before in my life. She actually put the pads on backwards, high left and low right. And it took about 2 minutes to get the first shock off. It told her 3 times to press the shock button. And when the athletic trainer finally pointed at her the 3rd time and said, press the shock button, when she did, it saved her life. That happened 5 years ago. This is Claire and her husband now. They got married on May 30th. And she has a degree in lower education, and her husband is in the military. So when seconds count, we want to make sure that public role is crucial in saving a life, prepared and willing to deliver basic life support, high quality CPR. We have to have access to AEDs, and then time between onset of arrest and provision of care is fundamental. We want to make sure people recognize a cardiac arrest. Thank you.